guess how it would be dealt with, not by the state. So a bunch of interesting things I want to talk about, but I guess the first thing I want to talk about is, well, I guess what's going on now with all the rioting and your thoughts on that.
Well, this guy who put the knee on a guy who was handcuffed behind his back. I mean, maybe if he's handcuffed in front of his body, he could still do something. Maybe, although even there it's crazy. But he was handcuffed behind his back. He couldn't do squat. Why put your knee on his neck? I mean,
Yeah.
it just seems so crazy. And I think that he is now being accused of murder, and that seems eminently reasonable to me.
Sure.
Now, the other 3 cops who stood by and watched him, I don't think they were murderers, but they were already fired, and certainly they should have been fired.
Well, I think they should be murderers because there were people, for example, if you watch the video, who try to go close to like help the guy, and the other cops like says, "Stay back, stay back." So if someone's killing someone else and you prevent other people from saving him, to me that's like if someone's drowning and you're like, "Hey, you can't save that guy." To me, no, you're guilty.
No, I agree with you, but you cut me off before I could say that.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, no, that's okay. You were anxious to get that on the record, and I think you're eminently correct. These guys, what I was saying is they were already fired from their job, and that's good, but they all ought to be accused of murder also. Maybe not first-degree murder, maybe a little less. I'm not sure. I'm not really a lawyer or a legal theoretician about first, second, and third-degree murder, but murder is there, and not just manslaughter, but murder. Because as you say, if the place was empty and nobody else was trying to save them, then they were just sort of guilty of dereliction of duty. Their duty is to save this guy's life, and they didn't do it. But as you say, they made it far worse because there are other people that wanted to stop that cop, get him off him, and they stopped that. So they're also murderers, but obviously a little less guilty than the guy with the knee.
Right.
The knee is worse. But how much worse, I don't really know. It's interesting that in one of the riots, I forget which city it was, one of the cops got separated from all the other cops, and he was surrounded by Black people who were protecting him because the mob, the masses wanted to kill that cop. And it was Black people who surrounded him and protected him, or fewer of them. There were enough of them to protect the cop. So, I think that's wonderful, heroic. And also the brother of Floyd, is that his name? Floyd, the guy who was killed?
Yeah, Floyd.
Right. His brother made an impassioned announcement saying, look, this is not cool. I'm putting words in his mouth. He didn't say it that way. But, this is not the way to operate. Why trash private groceries that had nothing to do with the knee on my brother's neck?
Right.
The whole thing is crazy. Why burn your own house down? Because a lot of these things are in Black areas, and they're just ruining Black businesses or businesses that cater to Black people. So there's a lot of craziness going on here, and there's a lot of evil. Well, not a lot of evil, just a little bit of evil. Yeah. 4 guys, the 4 cops were pure. Well, then all the rioters were evil too. Yeah. Why should they? Protesters are different. Peaceful protesters, the Constitution or something says you can peacefully protest. But sure. When you start knocking over cop cars and throwing bricks at cops and pulverizing private businesses, I think the cops should have been much more severe against those people.
Yeah. Yeah. This is one of the reasons I think you should have the right to bear arms, because I think if you see a cop look, the guy knew what he was doing. This wasn't like ignorance. He was a sadist who was on a power rush, and he knew he was killing the guy. And if you see that, I think you have a right to use deadly force to defend that person, because
Yeah.
now the cops
So not to defend the
leave
cop,
an
they have to
arrest.
defend Floyd.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. If somebody had a gun and shot that cop and thus saved Floyd's life,
Yes.
that guy would have been a vigilante and he would have been on the right side of justice.
Yes. I'm not
Because
against vigilantism. That just, that's just a status concept. Because what's vigilantism? Just any use of force not approved by the state, I guess. But yeah.
well, that's what they call it, vigilantism. And this would have been justified vigilantism because that guy was in the process of murdering somebody. Not an innocent person. Well, I'm not sure whether Floyd was innocent or not. He was accused of counterfeiting. And, we libertarians have a certain view on counterfeiting.
Yes.
Which we
Yes.
don't
But
have.
but even as Rothbard said, you don't shoot the bubblegum thief in the back, right? So
Yes. Yeah.
right. So force, I think, has to be proportional. You don't deserve to die because you forged a $50 bill.
Obviously, you're correct. What I'm talking about is the vigilante, the theoretical non-existent vigilante who might have shot the cop with the knee.
Right.
He would have been justified in shooting the cop with the knee and thus saving this, call him a counterfeiter's life.
Yeah.
So you're quite right. Even if he did counterfeit, and we libertarians have different views on counterfeiting, but suppose he, I don't know, stole some bubble gum or whatever he did. He doesn't deserve to die for doing that. There's no death penalty for stealing bubble gum.
Right. Right. Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's why I sort of get annoyed with conservatives who are sort of hypocrites, because they're always like, we have the right to bear arms against government when it becomes tyrannical. But then whenever government becomes tyrannical, they're the first to come and they defend the cops. And they're like, well, you should have been resisting. I'm sorry, but you don't just get to kill someone because they don't listen to you.
No,
right?
But he wasn't resisting. He was
That's
just
true. He
wrong.
wasn't. Even in this case, it's.
It was, look, if you're resisting, that's different.
No, but look, even if you're resisting, it's not. If I think a cop only has a right to kill people who are threatening people's life, including his own.
But when you're resisting, the cop's life is in danger. Now, look.
No, if the cop's trying to arrest you and you're just like, get away from me, and not threatening the cop, that's resisting, but that's not threatening the cop, right?
Well, there's a continuum between resisting and threatening. If you're waving your arms around and you're twice as big as me,
Mm-hmm.
That guy Rodney, who was, what was it? He was, I think there were 5 cops and they were all very small compared to him. He was a real big, heavy guy,
Mm-hmm.
very powerful. But this guy, forget about that. It's too theoretical about resisting. This guy wasn't resisting.
Right.
He was on his stomach. Right. With his hands tied behind his back with handcuffs.
Right.
I don't, maybe he was trying to bite the cop. I don't think he was, but suppose he was trying to bite the cop. All the cop has to do is move back a little bit. Namely, all he had was teeth.
Mm-hmm.
When your arms are tied behind your back and you're on the ground, you don't have legs, you don't have arms, all you have is teeth. We're being very theoretical because he wasn't trying to bite the cop. But I'm saying even if he were trying to bite the cop, still the cop shouldn't shoot him or put his knee on him or anything like that. The whole thing is just crazy.
Yeah. It was very unfortunate. Stefan Molyneux, who I think abandoned libertarianism a while ago, posted this really disgusting tweet where he said that the guy had underlying health issues and took cocaine and the cop didn't murder him, and anyone accusing the cop of murder has blood on their hands. And I'm like, seriously? Like, come on, that's pretty despicable. Like, why are you defending the cop?
I'm sort of a buddy of Stefan Molyneux, and I would consider him a good libertarian. And if he said what you said he said, and I have no doubt that you are reporting it accurately, he made one mistake.
Yeah.
Fine. But, just because a guy makes one mistake doesn't mean he's left libertarianism. But
true.
Again, I really shouldn't speak to this because I'm hearing it secondhand. But forget about Stefan Molyneux. Anyone who said that, look, suppose the guy had a heart condition,
Mm-hmm.
and if the cop's knee were on your neck or my neck, and we don't have heart conditions, we would have been okay.
Right.
But this guy, let's say, had a heart condition, and therefore the cop's knee killed him.
Right.
Well, you take your victim as you find him. If I push you and you're weak and your knees don't hold you and you fall and you hit your head, I'm a murderer.
Right.
even though I didn't mean to kill you, I just meant to push you a little bit with my finger.
Right.
You know, the slightest touch, but you take your victim as you find him.
Right.
So if the guy had a heart condition or cancer or whatever, and a normal person wouldn't have died by the knee, still the guy is a murderer because you take your victim as you find him. In this case, the Floyd was the victim, and the cop with the knee,
Right.
Mr. Knee, I don't know his name, so I'm calling him Mr. Knee, is still a murderer.
Right. I mean, when people make arguments like that, I'm basically saying, so you're basically saying, unless a person's like 100% healthy, he can never be killed by cops. Like if someone's obese and a cop just like shoots him in the face, well, you know, he was obese. I mean, he may have gotten a heart attack at the exact moment. Like, come on, you're being crazy.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you entirely that that this cop was, you know, a rogue cop, and deserves some very, very severe penalty.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about the death penalty. Now we're getting into libertarian punishment theory, but I think justice is being done. It took 2 or 3 days for it to be done, namely for him to be accused of third-degree murder, and now I think it's first-degree murder. I'm not sure, but this doesn't give an excuse to the unpeaceful protesters, the Antifa people,
Right.
who were creating mayhem, using this sort of as an excuse.
I mean, I think this is very much the fault of the left, because as much as I don't like police, I really don't like arguments where they make it a race issue, right? And I think I understand why they do it, and I'm curious what your thoughts are. But I think the reason they make it a race issue, well, one, the left makes everything a race issue, but two, I don't think they want to admit, like, this is a problem with the system they support. So they just have to make it about something else. But by making it a race issue, then I think you just create class warfare and race riots and stuff.
Yeah, well, I agree that this is, you know, if the skin's color were inverted,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a black cop with a knee, and it was a white victim, it should be the same thing. Justice doesn't look at skin color.
Right.
Right. So we would be saying the exact same thing if the skin color were inverted and it was a black knee on a white neck.
Right.
On the other hand, as Rush Limbaugh accurately said, if that occurred, we wouldn't even hear about it. Namely, if a black cop killed a white person, you know, it would be equally unjust.
Right.
But, you know, black people are very, very strange here. You know, they seethe with great indignation when a white person kills a black person. But if you look at the statistics, who are black people dying from? Other black people. Intra-black murder is vastly higher than white over black murder.
Right.
Right. And talk about black abortions for black babies is gigantic compared to, you know, whites killing blacks, let alone white cops killing black people.
Mm-hmm.
So if I were Black Lives Matter, and I am a Black Lives Matter person, I believe Black Lives Matter.
Sure.
I believe all lives matter equally. Right. Right. But if I were put in charge of Black Lives Murder, Black Lives Matter, not murder, Black Lives Matter. If I were put in charge of that and ordered to reduce the number of black deaths, I wouldn't look at white cops or white people.
Right.
I would look at black on black crime. And then I would look on maybe legalizing, what do you call it, heroin and cocaine and drugs like that.
Right.
Because look, when we had, what was it, prohibition of alcohol, for some reason it was young Italian men shooting other Italian men, young Italian men over turf. Mm-hmm. And now it's black people, young black men shooting each other over drug turf.
Right.
Well, we legalized alcohol, and no more Italian men are shooting anyone. You want alcohol, you just go to the store. Yeah. If we legalized heroin and cocaine and whatever, there'd be no more young black men shooting each other over turf. They might shoot each other over something else, I don't know, but at least they wouldn't be shooting each other over that. And again, I'm now in charge of reducing black murder, black death. Mm-hmm. Well, that's one thing to do.
Yeah. Well,
Another thing to do is, go ahead.
No, sorry, what were you saying?
There are other things that could be done remember, I just put myself in charge of Black Lives Matter.
Right.
And my my job is to reduce Black deaths. Well, one way to do it is to legalize heroin and other drugs. Another way is to look carefully at the number of Black abortions, because there are a lot of Black babies who are aborted. Another way is to get rid of the minimum wage law, because the minimum wage law creates unemployment for unskilled workers who are disproportionately young Black men. The unemployment rate of young Black men, even when Donald Trump was reducing their unemployment rate, is still quadruple the rate of middle-aged white men like you and I. And when you're unemployed at such high rates, you get bored, the devil gets your hands or whatever, and you go out and commit crimes. And then you either fight other Black people, or the whites kill you, the white cops kill you for that. Mm-hmm. So another plank that I would offer as being in charge of Black Lives Matter would be get rid of minimum wage. So these would be some of the things that I would do if I was serious about it. But instead, what the Black Lives Matter people are doing is focusing on white cops, or whites in general, but particularly on white. How many Black people are shot by white cops? Mm-hmm. I don't know. I'm sure it's less than 100 per year. Right. I don't know the numbers, but how many Blacks are shot by other Blacks? Thousands. Right. In Chicago alone, pretty much every weekend, you get a half dozen or a dozen Black people shot by other Black people. So the Black Lives Matter people should, I don't know, change their tactics if their goal is to save Black lives. And I assume that that's their goal. I don't know what other goal you could have if you're a Black Lives Matter person than to save Black lives.
Sure. I agree. I mean, I think they would respond to that by saying, one, I think it's a lefty organization and a lot of lefties do want to end the drug war. But I think they would say there's a difference between the average person committing a crime who then can get thrown in jail and people in positions of power who people look up to who get away with it. Right. So like if a group of people are killing me in large rates, but then they're viewed as a criminal and then get thrown in jail. Yes, it's bad that they're killing those people in large rates, but at least they feel like justice is being served. But when it's done by a white person in a position of authority who gets away with it, I think the reason they focus on the cops is because the cops can do it with immunity, whereas the Black gang members don't do it with immunity. So they feel like justice is already being served. So there's no real need to focus on it.
Well, we should focus on it if we're looking just at the quantity. Right. But you're making a very good point that when one Black gangbanger shoots another Black gangbanger, the first one, the murderer, can't hide behind whatever.
Right.
A shield. He can't hide behind a shield. Whereas a white cop or a Black cop can hide behind a shield. So yes, we should worry about cops more than the proportion, but the proportions are so gigantic. I mean, if you have 10 Black people killed per year by white cops, and you have 10,000 Black people shot by other Blacks, right? You have to go by the numbers if what you want to do is reduce the number of Black deaths, which I assume is what the Black Lives Matter people want to do or should want to do. Otherwise, they should change their name. But I take your point. Your point is a very good point, and I agree with it. It's something particularly onerous, particularly unjust, if you can hide behind a shield. So right. A little extra effort should be should be directed in that direction or put in that direction. Right. But they're putting all of their eggs in this one basket. Well, not all their eggs, but they're putting 99% of their eggs in the one basket of stopping white cops from shooting Blacks, which is counterproductive.
Sure. No, I would agree. I mean, I think the one other thing that they would maybe say is that they probably believe like that the government, I think a lot of people mistakenly believe like they can control government actors, but they can't control non-government actors. So they may feel like, even if more Black people are getting killed by Black gang members, I can't really like petition the gang members to like stop shooting me, but I can try to petition members of state to stop hiring cops who will shoot me.
Oh, yeah, sure. All I'm saying is that if you put 99% of your effort in a direction which kills 10 people a year, and 1% in the direction that kills 10,000 people, there's some misallocation of resources.
Sure.
So, but I'm not saying that they shouldn't oppose white cops killing black people.
Right.
That's crazy. But when they if they peacefully march or petition, that's one thing. But when they start shooting other cops who didn't have a knee, well, I mean, all cops have two knees, but you know what I mean. If they start attacking innocent cops, white and black, that's crazy. And if they start attacking store owners, that's crazy too.
Yeah. Well, I'm a bit more radical than you because I would agree that it's wrong to destroy property and stuff, but I don't know. I don't really think there are. I'm not advocating anything, but I don't really think there are innocent cops, meaning all cops have agreed to enforce unjust laws, right? So all cops, I think, are guilty of being an enforcer of unjust right. I mean, if you've taken an oath to be a cop to enforce the law and the laws are unjust, I don't really think you're an innocent cop, right? You may be just eating lunch and not be violent at that moment, but that doesn't mean you're not. That doesn't mean you're innocent in general.
Okay, I stand corrected. You make a good point. There are no innocent cops. But there are some cops that use their knee on people who are lying on the ground and kill them.
Right.
And then there are other cops who don't do that. And surely we have to make a distinction between them and the other kind of cops.
Sure.
So yes, I agree that if you sign on as a cop, you're not innocent. First of all, you're taking tax money, and that's a whole other issue. And secondly, you're supporting victimless crime laws, which is another problem. So I agree with you there. But surely not all cops have knees. That is bad knees. No, I'm not putting it right, because I have a bad knee. I just had a knee replacement.
It's just a few bad knees that are spoiling the bunch.
Right. That's right. We'll call it a few bad knees. There are only a few bad knees, and most cops don't have bad knees in that sense.
Right.
And to attack a cop who is not guilty of murder is unjust.
Sure. Fair enough. Although I don't know. I don't think taking taxpayer money is wrong. I don't know. My sort of view, I guess, is if the job itself violates rights, that's wrong. But if the job itself would exist in a free society and doesn't violate rights, like I don't think the mailman who subsists on taxpayer money is like guilty of anything.
Well,
because he didn't really create that environment,
We sort of disagree on this. Because, by the way, I have to acknowledge that I accept government money.
Sure.
Indirectly now, because I'm teaching at a private school which accepts government money. Right. But before that, right now I'm at Loyola University, New Orleans, which is a private university. But I've taught at University of Central Arkansas. I taught at State University of New York, Stony Brook. I taught at Baruch College. I taught at Rutgers. Those are all public universities. Mm-hmm. So I've taken money from government, and I also use public streets and do other things like that.
Nothing wrong with that.
Well, but I'm using government services. I use government libraries and museums and stuff like that. Yeah. I think you're quite right. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong per se with taking government money, but I think we can go further if we want to really dig deep into libertarian theory, and that would be it's okay for libertarians to take government money or for non-political people to take government money, but it's not okay for Marxists and government supporters to take government money because they are in the ruling class or they're supporting ruling class people. Sure. So we would make that very fine, narrow, essentially libertarian distinction.
Yeah. I remember when Ron Paul was running and people said stuff like, he's taking money from neo-Nazis. And I'm like, would you rather the neo-Nazis have it? I don't understand. As long as he's not doing their bidding, like, who cares?
Well, no, not who cares, but this is a mitzvah or this is a virtue.
Yes, the less money the bad people have, the better.
Right. And government is bad people. So the less money they have is good, but not for statist people. In other words, I teach at the university, and most of the professors are a bunch of pinko Marxists. Sociology departments, history departments, just full of them. Yeah. They have no right to take government money to teach in a public university, but I do. because
Right.
I'm a libertarian, and also apolitical people teaching math or whatever also do, because better the money is in their hands than in the hands of the thieves, namely the government.
Yeah, right. I mean, because yes, Ayn Rand made a similar argument, and I agree with this. Because, like, when people say stuff like, "Well, if you're against government doing X, aren't you a hypocrite if you use government services?" And I'm like, so wait, I don't. That's like someone robbing a bank, and the bank robber's saying, "Here, do you want some of the money?" No, you stole it. It's only fair you keep it all. I mean, no, the less that goes into the coffers hands of the people who advocate theft, the better.
Absolutely.
Right.
We agree on an awful lot of things, don't we?
Well, we'll find some stuff that we disagree on. Well, there is one topic I do want to talk about, but talking about disagreeing, we'll talk about one more thing. So one of my favorite books, which I was assigned to read, is called Philosophy Between the Lines, which is about how many of the philosophers, in order to not get persecuted, wrote stuff, and to have their stuff published, they had the literal meaning, and they had the meaning that was meant to be in secret. So sometimes they would make arguments just so people would more easily adapt it. So I remember, I think, watching something where you were like criticizing Milton Friedman for the reason that he argued against the draft, which is it'll make people more efficient soldiers. And I was thinking to myself, I'm like, come on, Walter. I think you have to know who your audience is. He was making that argument to people like Richard Nixon, right? So, like, if he said to Richard Nixon, you should end the draft because it's a violation of individual rights, Richard Nixon's not going to say, you've convinced me. He's going to be like, get the hell out of here. So I think from Friedman's point of view, he's like, I'm against the draft, and I just have to make arguments that the people in power will accept. So what's wrong with that?
You're making a good point, a very good argument, but I think I caught Milton with his pants down around his knees. I don't think I don't think he gets off that easily, because he did say things like, remember, the draft was during the Vietnam War. Now, my argument, I'm sure you'll agree with me, is that the Vietnam War was an unjust war from the U.S. side.
Sure.
And we don't want to make evil more efficient. We want to make evil less efficient. Not that I favor the draft, but I don't favor the volunteer military if the goal of it is to make the U.S. Unjust forces more efficient. Now, if he was doing it surreptitiously, and his heart was in the right place, and he was only doing this to convince Dick Nixon, you make a good point. But I'd have to go back to what I wrote there, and I'd have to go back to the exact quotes from him to see if we could save Milton's libertarian credentials by this surreptitious argument that he was only trying to convince Nixon to do that. But it's awkward. Well, the example I used is the concentration camps, the Nazi concentration camps. Right now, the Nazi concentration camps, the camp guards are drafted. And they don't much like their job. They sort of don't like shooting innocent people or starving innocent people. And what I say is, well, we shouldn't draft the concentration camp guards. We should have a voluntary concentration camp guard thing so that the people will really want to kill Jews and gypsies and blacks and gays or whoever the Nazis are killing. It seems a little difficult to attribute this surreptitious thing that I'm really trying to promote liberty by getting rid of the draft for the Nazi concentration camp guards. See, what Milton Friedman was doing is, in the middle of the Vietnam War, he was telling Nixon, let's get rid of the draft so we'll have a better military. Right. Well, who wants to get rid of the draft so much during that time and make it more, look, we all want to get rid of the draft. Don't get me wrong. I sort of have to walk on a tightrope here. I don't want to fall off on either side. Right. But he was making this argument during the Vietnam War, which let's concede or stipulate was an unjust war. Right. And you don't want to make injustice more efficient any more than we want to make concentration camp guards more efficient. Right. If anything, we want to make them less efficient so they'll kill fewer people.
Right. But what my argument is, look, we know Milton Friedman's general political views, and I think we can deduce that was he making that argument because that's what he really believed, or was he making that argument because he wanted to get rid of the draft and he wanted to make an argument where those in positions of power would actually listen to him?
Yeah,
And,
but you don't find Murray Rothbard saying, look, Murray Rothbard's against the draft too.
right.
I'm against the draft. You don't
Right.
find us saying in the middle of Vietnam War, hey, let's get rid of the draft right now so we'll make the military more efficient. You just don't find it. Now, look, you might be right. It's possible that Milton, that I've been too harsh on Milton. It's possible. And I never looked at this from that point of view.
Right.
So what I will do, if I ever have time, I'm busy doing a lot of things, but I promise you, I will go back and read what I wrote about him and read the quotes that from him,
Right.
and see if I can help him escape from my censure on your argument. And your argument is a very good, brilliant argument. I just don't know if it fits Milton Friedman, because when I wrote it, I didn't think of that argument. Right. And now what I'll do is I'll go back and read what he wrote and see if he can escape in that way. There was also this guy, Walter Oy, O-I, a Chicago professor, and there were several other people in this let's end the draft during the Vietnam War thing. And it wasn't just Milton, because he was buddies with all of those guys, and he never criticized them on any ground. So let me see if I can, and in our next interview, I promise, I'll have done my homework. I'll go read Milton's views on this, and I'll see if I can change my judgment about him, my critical judgment about him. But it's a very nice try. Whether it succeeds or not depends on the evidence, right, or our interpretation of what he said, which is very difficult.
Right. Yes. No, because I think there are two ways of arguing, right? Or, right, some people can say, I'm arguing just, this is what I believe in, this is my argument. And then there are some people who say, I want to convince you, so I want to use arguments that you'll accept. So for look, I can't read minds, but knowing Milton's general political views, what I think is he probably didn't like the draft. He thought it violated liberty. It was a great evil. And he's like, I'm in a position where I can convince the people that be to end this thing. What arguments can I use that they'll actually listen to?
Well, I'm prejudiced against this because of two grounds. One, I think less of him as a libertarian than you seem to think of him, because he deviated from libertarianism in so many, many other ways. And I've written about each and every one of them. And there must be 15 other things that he diverged from the good and the true. And secondly, why did he have to do it then? Why was the draft so bad right at that point? Why couldn't he do this, before or after the war? The fact that he did it during the war prejudices me against your view. But again, I say I will read this carefully with that in mind, and I'll see what I think, and we can discuss it in our next interview.
Sure. Now, fair enough. Now, the other thing, and this is an argument that I've heard people make, and libertarians I don't think really address it enough, and that is, if you talk to most libertarians, they'll say coercion is unjustified, the state uses coercion, therefore the state is unjustified. And then they seem to believe like people are unaware that the state is coercive. But I think a lot of people are consequentialists, and I think a lot of people would say, yes, the state is coercive, but if you really believe coercion is a great evil, the goal should be to minimize coercion. And if you could prove that coercion is minimized under a state, even if the state uses coercion, well, isn't that better than, having it under anarchy where there's not? And if government is a territorial monopoly, they don't really like competitors. So they have a strong incentive to prevent other people from employing coercion. So they're the only ones doing it. So coercion is minimized by basically, instead of constantly being surrounded by other people who do it, they're the only ones who do it. And if you're really dedicated to minimizing coercion overall, isn't it worth supporting a state that uses a little bit of coercion to stop all the other people who employ them?
Yeah, what you're doing is making an empirical claim.
Right.
Namely that if we have a little aggression, a little viciousness, we can have benefit by it because it will preclude greater viciousness. Mm-hmm. So it's an empirical question. Is it true or not?
Right.
And there's a lot of evidence against it. There's three people, I forget, Courtois and Rummel and somebody else, who calculate that, what was it, in the last century, 200 million people died from government. 200 million people, and this is apart from wars, which we should also add. And it's also apart from the deaths on the highways. I've written about, we have some 40,000 people a year dying on the highways, and I attribute that to government. And they never count, Rommel and Courtois and this third guy, I forget his name, never count motor vehicle fatalities as governmental.
Right. Or FDA killing people.
FDA, yes, certainly. FDA kills a lot of people.
Right.
Evil FDA, redundancy. Yeah, and if we add all that, and now, and you compare this with private enterprise murders, mafia, how many people does the mafia kill? How many people the blood kill? How many people do the Crips kill? Compared to 200 million, they kill nobody. So I think your argument is reasonable attack on anarchism from an empirical point of view. But I think that the statistics, and again, I'm pointing to statistics. Before I was pointing to statistics about how many people do white cops kill with knees or kill unjustly, compared to what's the intra-black murder rate, and it's stupendously different. And now I'm comparing private enterprise, quote unquote, private enterprise murderers, the mafia, the gangs, whatever, to government, and it's just ludicrous to even mention them in the same sentence. So evil is government. Right. So I'm an anarchist, not only on deontological grounds, but also on empirical grounds.
Sure, I would agree. I mean, I think another argument you sort of hear is, well, if we had, private courts, wouldn't justice just be wouldn't they just be subject to constant bribery and just go to the highest bidder? So, if Bill Gates or someone, murdered some guy, they'd say, here's $1 billion, find me innocent. And the court would say, great. And you really wouldn't have justice, right?
Well, that's the argument. I don't think too much of that argument.
I mean, neither do I.
First of all, private courts would probably bend over backwards against that. And they shouldn't. That they should ignore the wealth. Ideally, they should ignore the fact that Bill Gates and I have different amounts of money and I sue him or he sues me. But they would probably bend over backwards to give him a hard time to obviate themselves from that criticism. Because if that criticism got around, nobody would go to that private court anymore. I have this acquaintance who's a professor of electrical engineering at Stanford. And a lot of companies, nerd companies, what they do when they have a contract with each other, they'll say, if we ever have a dispute, we'll go to this guy. Because this guy has a reputation of, first of all, knowing what he's doing. He's sort of a super nerd, so he understands stuff that the average judge wouldn't understand. And secondly, he gives opinions such that even if you lose, you see the point, if you're at all reasonable. And that's the sort of judges that we would have in private courts. Whereas who do we have now as judges? In parliamentary systems, a lot of the judges are members of parliament who gave up their seat for the prime minister or something like that. We have favoritism, and we have some good judges, but we have some other judges that are just out to lunch. So I think, again, on an empirical basis, you'd have better judges privately. Look, you go to the state courts, and it takes 10 years to resolve something. You go to the private arbitration association, or you go to this guy from Stanford, and he'll give you an opinion in a matter of weeks,
right?
Maybe months if it's very difficult, but not years and not decades. Right. What's his name? Dickens once wrote about the jaundice versus jaundice case in I forget Dickens' book, and it took decades for the government to figure out what was going on. Government is very inefficient, and if we want justice, what did they say? Justice delayed is justice denied.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, if it takes 10 years to solve a case, it's unjust no matter which way it goes.
Right. I mean, my rebuttal when people give that argument sort of is, look, if we take that argument seriously, we can't really have, film critics, and we can't have Consumer Reports, and we can't have food critics, because how do we know? Maybe the film critic was just bought off by the film studio to give the film a good review. And so, instead we should, have one film monopoly instead. But to me, this is just ridiculous, because if you're the only film critic in town and you're caught taking bribes, well, it's better than no one. But if there's numerous film critics and you're caught taking bribes and they're not, no one would just trust you anymore and use you. So your reputation would be ruined. It's short-sighted. It's not really worth it.
The first time you took a bribe, even whether there were other film critics or not, you'd be your life as a film critic would end right then and there.
Right. Yeah, so I think it's the same for courts, that if they took bribes, no one would continue using them. Because why would I go to a court where there's someone always going to possibly be richer than me? I'm not going to take my chances with that kind of court and stuff. So, yeah. So that they're, I mean, that's the argument I would give. But I think it is an empirical claim. Let's have anarchy, and if you're really afraid, let's have anarchy, and let's see what leads to worse outcomes.
We already do have anarchy. We have anarchy on a world stage. We don't have world government. Mm-hmm. The relationship of the U.S. and Bolivia is one of anarchy. Namely, there's no world government above them. The relation of Chad and China, or Canada and Burundi, is all anarchistic.
Right.
Well, if you don't like anarchy, you have to favor world government.
Yeah.
Because right now there's anarchy between 225 or 230 different countries. Yeah. Thank God there's anarchy.
Well, I mean, some people could say, yeah, but letting you have countries go to war because of that why is that good, right?
Well, we don't favor war, but I'm Jewish, and we people are always running away from one country to another.
True.
And if there was world government, there'd be no place to run to. So, I'm sort of prejudiced against world government on that basis. But you're right, and now it's an empirical issue. Where do we have more deaths? By war between countries or intra? And the intra is, I think, wins.
Right.
To a great degree.
No, I would agree. I mean, that's why I think, right. I mean, that's why this whole objectivist stuff doesn't make sense. Because I remember watching an interview with Jan Brook, and he's like, well, you don't want one world governments because governments can make mistakes, but you shouldn't have thousands of governments either. I think 200 are good. And I'm like, that's totally arbitrary, dude. This is what your objective, reasoning.
No. I'll give you the right number of governments. The correct number of governments is 7.5 billion. We should each have one. Look, if they're so great, I want one. You can have one. And now if you ask a girl for a date, you can't ask her for a date. You have to get your foreign minister to ask her foreign minister if she'll go out on a date with you. I'm kidding about that, of course. But the point is, the ideal from the libertarian, anarcho-libertarian point of view is 7.5 billion governments, assuming we each have one. Namely, everyone should be sovereign.
Right.
Nobody should have to take rules, orders from anyone else unless you've agreed to take orders from someone else. I used to play the violin in an orchestra, and I agreed to take orders from the conductor. That's okay. You're in my class. You have to write your midterm. You have to write a final. You have to give me a term paper. I'm going to give you orders, but you agreed to take orders. But apart from agreeing to take orders, no one should take orders from anyone. Well, except the order that we all have, namely, no one should initiate violence or threaten violence against anyone else, namely the non-aggression principle. So we're all under those orders, namely to have negative liberty. But there's no positive liberty. You don't have to do anything that I tell you.
Yeah, I think George Carlin said it best. He said, I think when it comes to rights, you either have no rights at all or you have unlimited rights. Personally, I strive for unlimited. I think I could do anything I damn well please. But if you don't like what I have, if you don't like what I do, I believe you have a right to kill me. Now, where are you going to find a fucking fairer deal than that?
Well, wait, you have no right to put your knee on people's necks if they're lying on the floor with the handcuff behind them. You have no right to do that. You have no right to rape. You have no right to murder. Sure. You have no right to steal. We libertarians believe, some people say, well, libertarians are lawless. No, we believe in law. There's only one law. Right. And there are various subcategories of it. The one law is the non-aggression principle. Keep your mitts off of other people and their property unless you have their permission. So that precludes murder, rape, theft, arson, kidnapping, whatever.
That's true, yes. I think George Carlin was just being cute. But no, I would agree. I think governments have destroyed and done so much damage. I think it's hard to argue that the alternatives would be much worse. But I think these are empirical questions. But yeah,
Well, they're both empirical and deontological.
yeah,
The government is not justified because it initiates violence against innocent people. Now,
sure,
whether it will reduce the overall amount of initiatory violence is a different issue.
right. Well, I also think yes, but I think once you make excuses why it's okay to hurt people, I don't really trust that you'll protect people. Right? That's sort of my argument, right? Like I try to say when I try to convince people to be libertarians, I say to people, you know, if I say to you, I really want to babysit your children, and if you don't let me, I'm going to beat the shit out of you. Would you trust me to babysit your kids? No, of course not. So why would you trust the state to be good over justice if they have to force you to pay for their just system and they outlaw competitors and all of that? You know.
Very, very good point. Good.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, look,
Well,
it's almost the end of the hour, and I promised you an hour.
that's true.
So we have to wrap it up. And let me just say that it's always a pleasure. And I look forward to more of this. And I'll do my homework on
Sounds
Milton
good.
Friedman. And thanks again for having me on your show.
Sure, anytime. Be well. Bye.
Take care.
Take care.
Send me the URL for this.
I have to post it because it's not recorded automatically, but I will do that. Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Be in touch.
Yep, you too. Bye.